So I was playing Skyrim this week and I decided to make my Argonian look like Margaret Thatcher. It's a pretty swell idea.
Is that like the default?
Basically. You just have to add some really piercing evil eyes to it.
Hey guys, I was able to make it!
Hey! What's up?
Guys! I brought pizza!
Oh. So where did we leave off last time? I think we were going to a dungeon?
Classic. Tristan?
Oh, hello!
Hey, wait a minute. Thought slime?
You kidnapped me in a spaceship.
Don't know about that one, Chief. That doesn't sound like something I'd do. That's probably just a dream you had with cool special effects, maybe one that taught you a little lesson about believing in pseudoscience.
You wrote a note.
Did I? Here's a note for you. That wasn't me. That was a dream you had.
Then how do you explain...
Oh, man.
You know what? We'll get to that later. We're already really behind on starting. Okay, so you all meet in the town of Lilyvale, a quiet village.
Is there a bar?
Actually, yes. It's known as the Traveler's Produced. It's a warm and cozy place. There's music playing, and it's just lovely, and in stark contrast to the gray, rainy outdoors.
I, Vengwin, the half-elf rogue, go to the bar asking for ale and tips on our next adventure.
You talk to the barkeep. She's a half-elf.
Hey, Tristan. Tristan in editing here. Did you plan ever to actually get to the history at some point?
What?
Okay, buddy, you were supposed to make this a video about the Satanic Abuse Panic and use D&D as the framing device. This is just exploiting studio time to play D&D with your actual regular group.
Okay, maybe I did get a little bit distracted, but if you look at the narrative, I have subtle plans that involve interweave.
Oh, quiet. I guess I'll have to butt in and make this video even a bit educational. God, this is frustrating. Remember the last time you did fantasy stuff on this channel and no one watched it?
Yeah, but...
No buts. I'm gonna make this a history video whether you like it or not. Let's just roll into the credits already. Huh? Huh?
Oh, why are you like this?
I liked it. You notice as you get your drinks that there's a strange atmosphere in the bar. People give you looks. A burly man, one of the patrons, taps you on the shoulder.
What?
He says, "Hey buddy, I want to say that I've got my eyes on you. All of you.
Brynhilda the barbarian grumbles, "Hey, what did we do?"
You're adventurers, right? Adventurers are dangerous cultists who are in league with the devil and get involved in all sorts of criminal activity." Another person speaks up, "Yeah, my cousin went on an adventure once and he ended up committing suicide because of it." Another person, "Me too, I don't understand." "Exactly. This is dangerous. You should stop this act once and for all, because otherwise you're gonna end up in a lot of trouble."
We're very sorry to hear about your cousin, but we're a group of traveling adventurers, and we're certainly not criminals or devil worshippers.
Vengwin pickpockets the man.
That's not helping.
And I remember the Tiefling Warlock does worship the devil a little bit.
Shut up, Tristan. Are you doing some sort of religious rite thing? Is that what this is?
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No. Yes.
The idea here is that during the Satanic Abuse Panic of the 1980s, there were two high-profile cases of suicide, that of James Dallas Egbert III and Irving Bink Pulling II. These kids had a long history of drug addiction, depression, and public humiliation and friction with their parents over their sexual orientation. And I do not want to subtract at all from the extreme tragedy of the death of two children. But despite all those factors I mentioned earlier, Irvin Pulling's mother, Patricia Pulling, decided to blame Dungeons & Dragons, a game people didn't understand, but was becoming really popular with young Gen Xers.
Hey, look! A Dungeons & Dragons ride! Wow, neat!
The evidence these two even played D&D is actually a bit tenuous, but it nonetheless started a moral panic, much like you guys are facing right now.
No. We talked about this, Tristan. No, stop trying to educate us while we're playing D&D.
I can't help it. He's the one. He's the editor. He has all power. If you ever read like the film theorist Lev Kuleshov.
No, stop. Bad historian.
Haha, you can't get me here. This is in the context of a period of US history in which there was a rise in reactionary fear of social progress made in the last couple decades. It took the form of an evangelical religious right, taking the political stage in a way they shied away from before. Their issues range the gamut from anger over women going into the workplace to anger over free expression in general. A lot of anger, actually.
The townsfolk begin to stand up and surround you all. What do?
Friends! We are but innocent adventurers, here to deal with your local dungeon problem.
A hush goes over the tavern. The burly man speaks up again. Hey, you're talking about the priest? That priest gives our lives meaning. He is a member of this community, and we will defend him with all of our might. And they start picking up chairs and stuff. Roll initiative.
I pick up the stool and I smash it over the guy's head.
Roll to hit.
16?
Yeah, you hit. He had 1 hit point, so he goes down easily. You have knocked out half the villagers in the town, and you've destroyed the bar.
I'm gonna slit their throats while they're down.
And rob them.
What?
Hey, they don't need the money, they're dead.
I mean, that
Right thing to do.
Yeah.
How much gold do they have?
We need to find out what's going on in this dungeon. Let's ask around town.
Good point.
Okay, you leave the tavern, and
One sec, this part of the adventure takes forever. So, while they try to intimidate old ladies for information and threaten to burn down a shopkeeper's store if she doesn't give them a 2 gold discount despite them having tons of money, let's talk about a group called BAD. Patricia Pulling, the mother I mentioned earlier, tried to sue the company which made D&D back then, TSR, but the court threw out her case. She then partnered up with an Illinois psychologist by the name of Thomas Radecki, who was already the director of the National Coalition on Television Violence. Together, the two founded a new group to combat role-playing games called BAD, or BADD, which stands for Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. I know, it's an awful name, awful people. The group was closely allied with evangelical Christian groups who glommed on attacks on D&D's occult nature and ascribed all sorts of new charges to it. I think they're just about done now.
Brynhilde wants to go to the library.
it's a small town in the Middle Ages. Books take months to make, and they're extremely expensive. Most people in this town probably don't even have the ability to read, so...
Yes! Nat 20! Booyah!
Well, I guess there's a goddamn library.
Do they do any actual adventuring on this adventure? While these daredevils fumble their way around a library, let's go into a broader context about how such a thing took place. The backlash against D&D came about as part of a thing called the Satanic Abuse Panic. The second wave of occult scare carried over from the 1970s. A lot of people believe that at every level of society there lied a massive network of underground Satanists. They'd perform dark rituals or human sacrifices. These began as stories within evangelical Christian circles, but would spill over in the 80s into secular society.
She's tampering in dark-sided stuff!
Mix that with cultural anxiety as 2 working parent homes became more frequent and daycare more ubiquitous. There was a lot of cultural anxiety about giving children over to strangers for most of the day. Also, psychologists were getting into repressed memory therapies, which unearthed vivid memories of satanic abuse. These later turned out to be fabricated, causing many families a lot of pain. Psychologists, realizing how plastic our memories can be, have discredited and largely abandoned the practice. Wait, why am I talking about this? I did some fancy interviews with some actual religious studies professors I can show you.
So I am Joseph Laycock. I am an assistant professor of religious studies at Texas State University. It begins with pop culture in the 60s and 70s. Anton LaVey formed the Church of Satan in 1966. Rosemary's Baby was this, huge film in 1968, and it kind of put the idea in people's heads that your neighbors who seem very sweet could actually herald the Antichrist and destroy America. And then in the 70s, I think our entire country got much more paranoid with Vietnam and Watergate and things like this. So by the 1980s, you had people claiming that there was this vast satanic conspiracy that was murdering thousands of people a year, and they were operating in secret, and the police couldn't catch them because they owned the police and they had infiltrated all levels of the government. And people still believe this. This doesn't hold as much water in a court case as it used to, but we are still very much riddled as a society with this idea of a satanic conspiracy. I've been consulted in 3 different murder cases that involve these wild allegations of satanic conspiracies and things like that. There's a big debate as to why the Satanic Panic happened exactly when it did, because especially in the 60s and 50s, Satan was just sort of this goofy character, right? And if you listen to songs about Satan, or you watched a cartoon where Bugs Bunny is, making a deal with Satan or something, that didn't frighten people. And it's hard to forget that we were ever like that. But by the 80s, Satan is terrifying, Satan's everywhere, and Satan's coming for your kids. The fear of Satan has kind of peaked in the 80s. Dungeons & Dragons came out in 1974. Dungeons & Dragons was interpreted through this lens of cults that come to brainwash you. And terms like Dungeon Master really triggered public imaginations of, it's a cult leader, right? It's someone who can control your mind and brainwash you. That was the moment when all the papers in America were saying, this game can warp people's minds. And the bizarre theory of this detective were adapted into a novel called Mazes and Monsters, which became a made-for-TV movie starring Tom Hanks. And I'm sure it's the film Tom Hanks doesn't want you to see, but it portrays him kind of wandering around New York City, imagining that he is a paladin and interacting with, subways and thinking they're dragons and things like this. And so that put this idea further in people's heads that this game can cause a complete delusion. So 1982, you have a boy in Richmond, Virginia named Irving Bink Pulling. His nickname was Bink. He committed suicide, and his mother blamed his suicide on Dungeons & Dragons. While researching this book, I actually tracked down some people from that school, and what I learned was that probably Bink had only played Dungeons & Dragons for about 8 hours in his whole life. Their feeling was that the suicide was much more about sort of being angry at his parents. It was very gruesome, and I don't blame his mother, Patricia Pulling, for wanting some kind of scapegoat to put his suicide on, but her version of events was that the game basically programmed him like the Manchurian Candidate to come home and kill his family, and that the sort of hypnotic programming of the game was so powerful that his only alternative was to kill himself so that he would not carry out his assassin training, basically, and kill his parents. She turned it in her mind from this was a suicide to my son martyred himself protecting us from Dungeons & Dragons. And she formed a group called Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons and began writing books about this, and had no credentials to speak of, and had actually some pretty embarrassing gaffes where shows an inability to understand basic statistics, but her story of I am this mother trying to avenge the wrongful death of my son was so powerful that she became a celebrity throughout the 80s. And it got to the point where if you had been arrested for a crime, you could say, D&D made me do it. And Patricia Pulling would come in and testify on your behalf and say, yeah, this person didn't mean to rob a gas station, didn't mean to kill somebody. This game twists people. It's not their fault. This sort of coalition forms between Patricia Pulling, who was on about Dungeons & Dragons, and she wanted Congress to basically require a sticker that said this game will make you commit suicide, kind of the way that cigarettes have a warning on them. But there were other people who wanted to ban Saturday morning cartoons that they said had satanic messages, or ban media, or ban music. Thomas Radecki, his big crusade was I'm a psychologist, and I know that these films cause violence, cause rape, And he loved to just make up statistics. Eventually, he was sort of discredited, and Patricia Pulling got sick and eventually died, and their influence kind of died out. But in the 80s, they were well believed by everybody, and they were regularly on 2020 and shows like this, and they really had a lot of momentum behind the claims that they were making.
So that means...
According to this account, the mother conjured something in her grief.
And what she conjured must have been the thing that made the town turn against us.
So if we go to the house and we defeat whatever it is...
Then we'll be heroes!
Didn't you all just horribly assault people in the bar? What about all the people that you threatened and harassed?
Shut up, Tristan! We'll be heroes! What? Yeah!
Onward, my squires, to the grieving mother's home.
Okay, you can't knock on the door, pick the lock, and knock down the door all at the same time. You have to pick one.
I'm picking the lock.
Okay, roll a Thieves' Tools check.
Brunello, you can knock down the door.
Yeah!
As you smash down the door, an evil spirit comes out and hovers over the whole party. He goes for thought time. He lunges. Does a 32 hit?
Fuck you.
And so, the party battled. It was a close fight, and not everyone survived.
Man, come on.
That sucks, man.
No.
Remember, friend, bury me at the top of Mount Helena.
Where?
Mount Helena, where my character grew up. Didn't you read my backstory? Dimitri? Did none of you read my backstory?
What the hell?
Tristan?
I mean, it was pretty long.
You didn't even read it!
What is that?
That's our dragon! And this is me getting my father's sword with lightning on top of Mount St. Helena!
But, eventually, the day was won.
How you want to do this?
I swear!
Hey friends, I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I just want to take a quick second here to pay the bills and feed the cats. So to do that, I'd like to thank this video's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. You've probably seen a lot of ads for VPNs these days, and you might wonder why they're worth it. And I can say that there are several reasons to get a VPN. The biggest one being, what we're going to talk about today, price discrimination. Airplane ticket sites, apartment booking portals, as well as car rental providers and other vendors practice something called price discrimination, where they can change prices based on what your IP is. You'd be surprised how much money you can actually save using a VPN when you're shopping online. Surfshark also makes sure that your surfing is safe, with security measures to protect you on public Wi-Fi networks, and even warns you of potential hackers. Now, Surfshark has given me a great deal for those who want to sign up. If you enter the code STEPBACK or go to the link in the description, you can get 83% off and an extra free month. Thank you, Surfshark, for making videos like this possible. Bad was exposed for using terrible data, and as the 80s turned into the 90s, the claims got more fantastical and people no longer took it seriously. Role-playing games became a hobby alongside many others. But in evangelical circles, the taint
Well, that's fine.
That's a butthole.
still remains. The association between playing RPGs and being part of satanic criminality is still hiding in the occasional police manual. You enter the bar you left 90 minutes ago. You're still denied a room. People still speak poorly about adventurers.
But I thought we defeated the thing that made them hate us.
Sometimes people's feelings are more complicated than that. Yeah, Dungeons & Dragons might have lost its satanic allure, but moral panics and mistrust are deeply baked into the human condition. It goes a lot deeper. Fear of the unknown, fear of those you don't understand. Well, you know, I really can't say it myself. I did a whole interview about it. Why don't we just roll to the interview?
These stories, these images, these allegations, these narratives of horrific activity always seem to be an inversion of, or represent an inversion of what we hold as normal for society, for genders, for family life, for religious practices, for sacraments or sacramental magic in some ways, witches or Jews in the blood libel stories, or Satanists in the modern case, they would eat babies, they would collect at night, they would sing terrible songs, they would eat disgusting food, they would roast babies, they would use their flesh to fly with, things like that. So this is all kind of a kind of systematic inversion, or what we, the main community, hold as proper, as safe, as familial. And these kinds of inversions of the structures that we hold dear in society that make us feel safe, these inversions are frightening, they're polluting, they're dangerous, and they stimulate us to blot them out, to want to eliminate them from our reality. And this is kind of one of the bases of lynchings and pogroms and things like that. And you could probably say completely cross-culturally that, the notion of the witch, the notion of the monster, the notion of the demon is always a systematic inversion, or let's say a selective inversion of some part of our system of thought. What makes sense to us is then inverted in the form of the demon or the monster or the cultist, let's say.
One thing I'm trying to think about when I was writing this book is traditionally Christianity regarded the imagination as something that is sacred and very important, right? Because Christianity is about trying to know things that transcend ordinary human logic. And if you read texts like, say, the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, it's describing, we can't meet God in person, so we have to visualize him. We have to use our imagination. But all of a sudden, by the 80s, we have Christians basically saying the imagination is satanic, right? It's evil. And this gets to a point where some of the tracts against Dungeons & Dragons basically say, reality as it currently exists is exactly the way that God wants it, and imagining anything being different is showing contempt for God. So fire hydrants are red because God wants red fire hydrants. Imagining a blue fire hydrant is evil, right? Because if God wanted them to be blue, they'd already be blue, right? There were also people saying that monsters cannot exist in the imagination, that basically anything you imagine is real. And so if you're imagining fighting a troll, that's actually a demon. The demon's actually physically there somehow in your mind. So the imagination itself becomes dangerous, and they're even sort of twisting translations of the Bible to make it say that, that we are fighting against imaginations. And this, in my opinion, is a terrible translation from the Greek. And so I thought this is very odd. And so I try to kind of historicize, where did this come from? How did Christianity go from being very pro-imagination to being very anti-imagination? And there's a number of reasons for that. I think the Puritans were very suspicious of the imagination. I think there is a capitalist angle to this, the idea that the imagination is unproductive. But I think the big one is an awareness that people with an imagination are harder to control, that a prisoner who can imagine life outside the prison will always be more dangerous than a prisoner for whom the prison is all he's ever known. And I think that on a deep level, they recognized that people who were sort of actively imagining alternate realities would be harder to control and would be more likely to question the claims of this particular brand of conservative evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, but this is D&D. Come on. Can't you take a dark social topic that's all complex? Just make it something Brynhilde can punch in the face?
Well, there is one monster that I can...
I, the darkness within every soul, have awoken to challenge you, Brunhilde the Barbarian. Yes. Prince Valiant the Paladin. Amemnon the Warlock. Vengwin the Half-Elf Rogue. And Bartis the...
No! I died! Remember?
Oh, right.
Sorry.
Remember?
No.
Is that part of your backstory?
It is now!
You must challenge me to a final showdown for the souls of all living things.
Roll initiative.
Yeah.
Yeet!
So, good sesh?
Yeah. I think it went alright. How you feeling?
It's fine. It's fine.
Are you fine?
I'll pass. All things pass.
Sleep it off, that's what I do. Pop a bunch of melatonin.
Alright, so same time.
Rookie tip. If you try and roll high numbers on the dice, it usually works out better.
Oh, burn.
I'm trying to help.
So, same time, same place next week, guys?
I'm down.
Yeah, I'll be there.
I've got a thing.
We'll figure it out.
See you all later.
Bye. Have a good week.
Get home safe. Don't go home with strangers.
Oh, one thing before we go. Whatever happened to D&D? Why doesn't it have the same association with Satan today?
Well, that's actually a very insightful question there, Thoughtsline. See, what happened was, after Bad lost a lot of its credibility, D&D's reputation more or less returned to where it was. There's still a little bit of stigma that stays to this day, but mostly it recovered. Especially because in the 90s, new games came out like Vampire the Masquerade, which made D&D look pale by comparison.
Oh. Well, goodbye.
Hey, wait.
Human.
I should also mention D&D and role-playing games in general has had some remarkable positive impacts on people's lives. The Player's Handbook is a bestseller on Amazon's health and fitness section for a reason. It's shown to build a sense of confidence, trust in others, help those with feelings of shyness or low self-esteem, and a lot of promise for those on the autism spectrum. Real psychologists are looking into it as a form of therapy. Schools are starting to host it as a club and sometimes even a class. A little escapism and imagination does a person good.
Hey, I was thinking about the next character I'd make. I was thinking about maybe a cleric, so someone could heal a character when they're injured?
Well then, I think it's about time you learned how to really cast spells.
You mean you're going to teach me how to have the real power?
Yes, you have the personality for it. Now.
The intense occult training through D&D prepared Michael to accept the invitation to enter a witch's coven.
He was a fishmonger until the dragon attacked the seaside town. But then he inherited his father's sword, which brought the lightning and killed the dragon. Which is why I started level 1 in a tavern and met the lot of you. Gosh.
You guys go on ahead. I'll finish up here. The wet work.
Oh.
You're the paladin.
Prince Valiant.
You're Prince Valiant the paladin.
Are you a paladin who conquered?